Weird World has narrated many unbelievable stories about people who claim they had once lived another life in another place and another time, and were able to come up with credible proof. The following story is another amazing case where a woman by the name of Barbara Carlin said that as a young girl, she told her parents she had lived another life with a different family in another country. Barbara Carlin was born in Sweden in 1954, and from a young age, she did not feel part of her family. Barbara believed that she'd lived the life of another girl, but initially would not have realised who the girl was, because when she was born, Anne Frank's story would have been relatively unknown and had died at the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp just 9 years before Barbara was born. At the time, nobody would have known about Anne Frank and her tragic story, as it was not published until 1947, initially in Dutch, and it would be several years before it would become a bestseller in other languages. However, Barbara continued to have vivid dreams and a fear of uniforms. Her parents dismissed everything she said as childish imaginings, but her dreams and nightmares continued, and Barbara began to ask where her parents were, insisting that her current mother and father were not her real parents. She would ask the whereabouts of a girl called Margot, and other names of people where the family had no idea what she was talking about and had no answers for her. But records later showed that Margot was the older sister of Anne Frank, and Margot, like her sister, succumbed to spotted typhus in February 1945, tragically 2 months before the camp was liberated by British soldiers. As the years passed, Barbara continued to ask questions about her real family and was insistent in her belief that she was not Barbara, and her parents continued to doubt her story, that she was another person from another family, and that she would eventually grow out of it. They even took her to a psychiatrist who was unable to diagnose any problems with her. Barbara would not hear about the tragic story of Anne Frank, the Holocaust and concentration camps until the 1960s when she was at school. She did further research into Anne Frank and read her book for the first time and was amazed at how much they both had in common. They both enjoyed being outdoors, reading, and wanted to be writers. Their facial features were similar, and Barbara had similar fears related to Anne Frank's experiences, especially an aversion to men wearing uniforms. Whilst the classmates were hearing about the atrocities committed against the Jews, Barbara would come to the realization that she was Anne Frank, and when the teacher spoke about Anne Frank's life, she was talking about Anne and her family when they were in hiding, knowing that it had been her family. The fact that she now believed that she was Anne Frank in her previous life, Barbara felt it best she kept to herself and did not dare disclose any of her beliefs to her classmates for fear of being ridiculed. Barbara would become a writing protege in school and believed that had Anne Frank lived, she too would have been successful. But Barbara's parents continued to doubt their daughter's belief that she was Anne Frank. But things would take a strange turn when the family decided to go on holiday to the Netherlands. When they arrived in Amsterdam, the family were initially lost, as Amsterdam is a difficult place to navigate for visitors. The family wanted to visit Anne Frank's house, and even though a local drew them a map, they still struggled to find the house. It was at this stage that Barbara said to her family that she knew how to get to the house. As the family had no other options left, decided to follow their daughter. Barbara then proceeded to take them through a maze of back streets and various alleyways, and she appeared to know exactly where she was going. And within no time, they arrived at Anne Frank's house and found that it was now a museum. The family had never been to Amsterdam before, so how was their daughter able to traverse the many back streets and alleyways so easily to get to the house? But this was just the beginning, and there would be other extraordinary moments that would eventually change her family's mind about their daughter's reincarnation belief that she'd lived the life of Anne Frank in her previous life. On arriving at the house, she noticed that the original steps were missing and remembered the exterior being different, and when inquiries were made, they were told that everything Barbara described was factual. Once inside, she felt terrified, and as they walked around the museum, she was able to relate to her family's stories that would not have been public knowledge. Barbara was both apprehensive and excited at the prospect of entering Anne Frank's bedroom, and as she walked into the actual room, was both disappointed and distraught on finding that the walls were bare, because the newspaper clippings of movie stars which had been placed on the walls as Anne Frank were missing. Her mother then asked the guy whether there had been any newspaper clippings on the wall, and was told that yes, there were clippings on the walls, but unfortunately visitors were touching them and even stealing them for souvenirs, so they'd been taken down to be looked after and would eventually be placed in frames. However, for Barbara to be in the building became too emotional and she ran out in tears. The amount of evidence the family had received after visiting Anne Frank's museum was enough to convince her family that Barbara was telling the truth and was probably the reincarnation of Anne Frank, who had died of typhus in 1945 at the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in northern Germany, and had reincarnated 9 years later in 1954 as their daughter Barbara Karlin in Sweden. Barbara continued writing into adulthood and wrote a book about her experience in 2000 called And the Wolves Howled, Fragments of Two Lifetimes. Barbara also served as a mounted policewoman for the Swedish National Police Force. She went on many speaking engagements where she spoke about being the reincarnation of Anne Frank. She later met a cousin of Anne Frank's called Buddy Elias, who was initially sceptical about her claims. When he first met her, he did not disclose his identity, and after talking with her, he found there was an immediate connection and she knew things only the Frank family would have known. Barbara said that over time the memories have faded, but every so often still come back to her, and believed it was a life's work to do justice to Anne Frank's story, and she was even supported by the head of the Anne Frank Foundation. Unfortunately, Barbara Karlin passed away after a long illness on October the 12th, 2022.